I thought it was excellent.
Can we go over it? No, it was confusing.
Sure, we'll finish. I think we'll finish early. Okay. Can somebody email me that one? Is it in PDF or is it in?
I have. Yeah, it's PDF, I think.
Because I want to change it. I can copy and paste, right? I should be okay. I'm okay, right? Stop.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now let's start with one crazy glucose metabolism pathway known as pentose phosphate shunt. Pentose phosphate shunt pathway. In this pathway, glucose 6 phosphate is converted to 6-phosphogluconate, and 6-phosphogluconate is converted to ribulose 5-phosphate. Okay.
Ribose?
Yeah. Initially ribulose and then becomes ribose. So let's just call it ribose. That's fine. Okay. Here is an enzyme of extreme importance to us, especially to Ahmed. Yeah, for you. I'll tell you why. See if you can make sense out of it. No, nothing to do with that. So, it's just because when he was a child, he traveled from Afghanistan all the way to Egypt on feet, and he's supposed to be Afghan national, but now he's Egyptian, so it has to do with that. I told him stories, and I love that kid. He makes me laugh, so that's why. So the enzyme here is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Okay. The second enzyme is 6-phosphogluconate dehydrogenase. Please memorize these, especially the first one, Ahmed. Yeah, especially. The reason I'm saying is this deficiency is common in Egyptian. Very common in Mediterranean people, which includes, let me come to the disease, I'll tell you. Okay. Now, okay, so here, if it's dehydrogenase, what did dehydrogenase use? Always NADH or NADPH or FADH, one of those. But in this case, it's NADP is converted to what? NADPH in both cases. NADPH. So what is it generating, this reaction? This reaction is generating something big thing, which is very important for us. NADPH. This is what we care for. This reaction produces what? NADPH. This is a huge source of NADPH. These two enzymes are located where? In the cytoplasm. Memorize that. They're not mitochondrial enzymes, they're cytoplasmic enzymes. Okay? So that's one thing. Okay, ribose 5-phosphate. You can use ribose 5-phosphate because it looks like this. And if you see the picture, you will be like, oh, I get it. Yeah. This is used for nucleotide synthesis, DNA and RNA. Of course, RNA first, because it's ribose, right? Ribose have to be converted to deoxyribose. What's the enzyme that converts ribose to deoxyribose? Ribonucleotide reductase. Memorize that. Cannot ignore it. Which we discussed in DNA and RNA. So anyhow, question?
No.
Okay. So we can use ribose 5-phosphate to make the sugar, donate the sugar to DNA and RNA. Okay, and it can further be converted back to glucose. And here we need an enzyme known as transketolase. Transketolase. Ketolase. Okay. Transketolase. Okay. Now, what's the big deal? NADPH is anabolic molecule. It is needed by reaction that requires a lot of energy. NADPH is a huge source of ATP, much bigger than NADH. It's a high energy compound. So anabolic reactions requires these guys. Anabolic reactions. Now let's say, what are these anabolic reactions? When you make bile salts,
Cholesterol?
very good. Cholesterol.
Steroids?
Okay, cholesterol and steroid are the same thing, right? Good. Okay, fatty acid synthesis.
Vitamin D?
Vitamin D, steroid, cholesterol, same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Soon, I think Friday you will learn about lipids, that the source of vitamin D, bile salts, and all of these, and steroid hormones, especially steroid hormones and and vitamin D, is cholesterol. Cholesterol is the source of them. Okay. So all these reactions, conjugation of bilirubin and blah blah, all these reactions requires a lot of energy. Even DNA synthesis requires NADPH. Protection or production? Say the other one. Protection. There you go. Protection. Okay. Alright, so now guess what? There's other enzymes. So this whole cycle you want to memorize for only one thing, and that is for NADPH. The purpose of this shunt or pathway is only to understand what is the role of NADPH. Okay? NADPH reduces glutathione. Okay, let me write it down. Can I erase this now? Okay. I'm gonna do it. Okay. Glutathione is a molecule that is supposed to detoxify. This guy detoxifies. Detoxify free radicals.
Especially important for acetaminophen.
Corn syrup?
No,
Acetaminophen, yeah. And all of them. Yeah. Glutathione will cause detoxification of free radicals. Okay. Now, so that's one thing. Free radical exists as a reactive oxygen species. For example, this is superoxide. Superoxide. That's superoxygen. That's one radical. Hydrogen peroxide. Another one. This is another one. Hydroxide ion. These are free radical. And then you have perchlorate. Okay. These are free radicals. These guys are free radical. Well, the dot literally means free radical. Now, free radicals are toxic to human body, but they are, guess what, normal products of what? Metabolism. But you know, your metabolism is not so perfect. So guess what? In the process, you produce these free radicals, and then glutathione is supposed to detoxify them. Good?
Only glutathione?
Okay. Glutathione. There's other ones too, but it's the major one. Glutathione and peroxisomes is the major one. Okay, so glutathione will detoxify them and then neutralize them. For example, convert. We have catalysts that will convert hydrogen peroxide into what? To water and oxygen. Yeah. Okay, so there's other ones too, but glutathione is important for them. Okay. Now, glutathione reduction requires, or activation requires, NADPH. NADPH. NADPH is needed for glutathione production. Okay, glutathione production. You need NADPH. If you don't have NADPH, what happens to glutathione? It's mostly oxidized form, and it's not able to neutralize free radicals. So in essence, the only purpose of NADPH right now we can think about is detoxification. Detoxification. Good? So think for that. The other source, the other purpose of NADPH is to make cholesterol, bile salts, fatty acid, or fatty acids, you know. So two things, NADPH. Detoxification. So NADPH has a role in detoxification. It's a detoxification and anabolic reaction. Not catabolic. Anabolic means building larger molecule. Those that require high energy. So that's the two purposes of NADPH. Yeah.
I have a question. Is NADPH, does it reduce glutathione or does it like, is it used for the production of glutathione?
Which is the same thing.
Okay.
So glutathione in the oxidized form is inactive. It cannot help the detoxification. So at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It just gives the hydrogen ion to glutathione. Okay, so the hydrogen ion is donated. It's carried by these guys. Again, they're nothing more than a carrier, right? So if you worry about the molecular biology of it, it simply gives the hydrogen ion, not a proton. Hydrogen ion is hydride ion, like negative hydrogen ion. It gives it to what? To glutathione. And glutathione can now actually cause neutralization of free radical. If you don't give the hydrogen ion, then glutathione can't do anything. It's inactive in a sense. Okay? That's the only difference. Okay? Now you can have inactive glutathione all you want. It's not functional for this purpose. Okay? But glutathione is made of glycine and cysteine and glutamine, if you care for it that way. But that's irrelevant. Irrelevant. You can have a knife, you know, that is covered with a case. You can cut anything with it. So you have to remove the case. Okay. Now, so the enzyme that produces NADPH, one of them was glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Correct? That's one enzyme that produces NADPH. Correct? What is it produced from? Glucose 6-phosphate, and it gives you 6-phosphogluconate. Correct? There's one more enzyme, isocitrate dehydrogenase. And isocitrate dehydrogenase, what do they do? It takes isocitrate and converts to what? Alpha ketoglutarate. Very good. Okay. Okay. Another one is glutamate dehydrogenase. Glutamate dehydrogenase enzyme. Glutamate dehydrogenase takes alpha ketoglutarate and converts to what? Glutamate. Okay. So these are the enzymes. Takes alpha ketoglutarate, converts to what? Glutamate. Now, all of them produce what? NADPH. But do you remember that when you talk about isocitrate dehydrogenase, it was able to, in the Krebs cycle, it only produced what? NADH. There's a form of it, the second version of it, who can produce NADPH. Okay? It's the same enzyme but has different version of it. These are the three enzymes that I know of that can produce NADPH. Okay. What is the location of glucose 6-phosphatidehydrogenase? This enzyme. Where would you find this enzyme? Only cytoplasm. Thank you. Only cytoplasm. Very good. How about isocitrate dehydrogenase? It's a different color. Only mitochondria. How about glutamate dehydrogenase? Mitochondria. The only one that's cytoplasmic is what? Glucose 6-phosphatidehydrogenase. Now,
wait, N6PG.
Yeah.
Glucose 6-phosphate and 6-phosphogluconate.
6-phosphogluconate dehydrogenase.
They're both in the cytoplasm.
Yeah. Okay. Now there's the issue. The issue here is there's no such thing as isocitrate dehydrogenase deficiency, glutamate dehydrogenase deficiency. They are severe. They don't exist. If they are, it's a small amount and people usually don't survive them. But there is such thing as known as glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Okay? It's also known as glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, right? Okay. Now, if you have deficiency of this enzyme, what is it? What's the problem? Number one, this enzyme gene is located on the X chromosome, so it's X-linked, recessive. It's inherited in X-linked recessive fashion. So who's affected by this? Boys. Okay. So that's first thing. Where is this deficiency more common? In Mediterranean areas, which includes Italy, Portugal, Spain, Egypt, Algeria, North Africa, and South Europe. Okay, so those areas. It's common in those areas. It's prevalent in those areas. Okay. Now, if you have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, so is that a big deal? If it is, please tell me why. If it's not, let's move on.
Yeah.
Why is it a big deal?
Anemia.
Why anemia? Why hemolytic anemia? Why rupture of RBCs?
Free radicals. Increased free radicals. There's no mitochondria and response.
There you go. Now we're talking. Well, he just said that these two are found in the mitochondria. RBCs don't have mitochondria. So if you have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, it doesn't mean it's only deficient in the RBCs. It's deficient in all cells of your body. But only RBCs are affected. Why? Because they're solely dependent on glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase for generation of NADPH, since they don't have mitochondria. RBCs, one more time, just like we talk about pyruvate kinase, RBCs don't have mitochondria. Therefore, they cannot generate NADPH from mitochondria. They don't have it. They only have one source of NADPH, and that is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Make sense? So therefore, by this deficiency, only RBCs are affected. Any cell that has mitochondria is not affected by it, because those cells will get NADPH from other sources. They will get it from isocytosine dehydrogenase and glutamate dehydrogenase. Not a problem. But RBCs don't have mitochondria. They don't have these enzymes. They only have glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. If that enzyme is deficient, there's nothing for them. So in RBCs, there is lack of NADPH. Other cells will not have this problem. Only RBCs would. Now guess what? So if RBCs are unable to produce NADPH, who cares? The only thing is they cannot prevent free radical damage. So now let's move on. I hope you understood this part, okay? I'm going to erase it. This is a big disease. It always comes on the exam. Always, always. Always look for boys being affected. Always from Mediterranean area. At least on the exam. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in me or my ethnic group or other ethnic groups. It is endemic, or it's more common, it's more prevalent in Mediterranean area. Just like diabetes is more common in Hispanic here. Just like hypertension is more common in African American here. Just like sickle cell anemia is common in African American, and just like cystic fibrosis is common in European, and just like Crohn's disease is more common in European and Central Asian. So there are these factors. So that's what they're going to use, the ethnicity and gender always. Okay.
What is this disease called?
Glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Yeah. But you can call it anemia, hemolytic anemia. But this hemolytic anemia is caused by what? It's not caused by pyruvate kinase, it's caused by glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. So that's what the disease is called, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency anemia. Okay. Now, let's say how it develops anemia. Look, once we have RBCs, they do cause metabolism of glucose to generate ATP. But also other cells are producing free radicals, and the free radicals are flowing freely in plasma. RBC don't have any NADPH to protect themselves from these free radicals. So now free radical can cause damage to RBCs. So RBCs are more prone to free radical damage. That's all there is. They're more prone, so then they can cause damage to them. Free radical damage, meaning that these free radicals cause, and what do they do, free radicals? What do we call that term? Please, there's one term for lipid per oxidation. This is what free radical do, and it's a chain reaction. It keeps going non-stop. Lipid peroxidation, please memorize that. Free radical causes lipid peroxidation. Now, the plasma membrane in this case, let me do this. The plasma membrane of RBCs is made of what? Lipid bilayer. So it causes damage to this lipid bilayer. And when it's damaged, some molecules will get exposed on the surface of RBCs, and now complements will come and attach to them. complements. And the complements, well, they're like knives. They will punch a hole in the RBC and lyse them. So it's hemolytic anemia. Now, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is hemolytic anemia. Now, hemolysis is the term. If I'm going too fast, slow me down, because I want to go over that exam. This will be the last thing for today. We're done with glucose metabolism after this. So the term hemolysis simply means bursting, rupture of RBCs. Rupture of RBCs. Two places this can occur. One is within vessels, which is known as intravascular. The second one is in spleen, primarily spleen in adults, some in liver, some in lymph node, some in bone marrow, and these are known as reticuloendothelial organs or tissue, but I'll keep it to spleen for now because that's the primary one. And spleen, it's done by the help of macrophages. Macrophage. In blood vessel, it's done by who? Complements. Complements, specifically, it's known as membrane attack complex, or MAC. Return of the Mac. Do you remember that song? It's an old song. Yeah. Okay. So macrophages and membrane attack complex. At the end of the day, when you burst RBC, when it's burst, when it dies and it ruptures, but now, is there anybody who doesn't know what RBC is for? All of you guys know what's the function of RBC. What is RBC for? To carry oxygen. What carries oxygen? Hemoglobin. So RBC is full of what? Hemoglobin, hemoglobin, hemoglobin. Obviously, if it ruptures, what happens to hemoglobin in blood? It swells and will increase. Even if it's done in spleen. Spleen is also vascular, so all the hemoglobin will accumulate where? In blood, regardless. Now, hemoglobin has two parts to it. Hemo and then globin. Okay, after hemoglobin is released in blood, since it's toxic, then your body and your liver and your spleen, the macrophages will take this and separate them. It will separate them into, the hemoglobin will be separated into globin and into heme. Globin is a protein and it's converted to amino acid, but heme is a toxic substance. It's water insoluble. Further, in the macrophages and in blood, it's opened up. The ring of heme looks like this. It looks something like this. In the center of it, it has iron. And this ring is opened. Look, it's heme right now. If you open it, it will look like this. Okay? When you open the ring, it's still insoluble. Now, but the open ring is known as bilirubin. Bilirubin. Billy and Rubin got together. And then they made something like this. Okay? So this, now, so that's bilirubin. Bilirubin, if it deposits in your skins, it will give you yellow color, jaundice. So deposition of bilirubin in your skin will, so it will give you jaundice. Jaundice is caused by because of what? Too much bilirubin being deposited in your skin, in conjunctiva of your eyes, and so forth. Okay, so jaundice. Bilirubin should be conjugated by the liver. Conjugation means you add a sugar to it. Glucose, UDP glucose. When you add UDP glucose to bilirubin, it becomes conjugated and it's more water soluble now. So we have two types of bilirubin. Conjugated and unconjugated. Okay, so bilirubin is two types. Unconjugated and conjugated. Unconjugated is very toxic. It's insoluble. Conjugated is still mildly toxic, but it's water soluble, so you can pee it out. You can get rid of it. You can get rid of it in stool. Now, if bilirubin gives stool brown dark color, so when you have too much bilirubin and it's not being conjugated, some of it will go where? In urine. So it'll make urine dark color. and stool will stay light color. Light stool. So that's typical of all hemolytic anemias. Doesn't matter what causes the hemolysis, the result is the same. So in glucose 6-phosphatidehydrogenase deficiency, we have deficiency of an enzyme known as glucose 6-phosphatidehydrogenase. It's X-linked recessive. Who's affected? Boys. So they will carry this mutation for the rest of their life. Now, the only time you'll have symptoms if there's hemolysis. If there's no hemolysis, no symptoms. It's silent. No symptoms. When would you have more hemolysis? When you're under stress, infection, acidity. When plasma acidity increases, so the risk factor, let's talk about triggers now. Look, glucose 6-phosphatidehydrogenase carriers are not always symptomatic. So it is episodic disease. And there are triggers for it. And who are the triggers? Acidity, let's say low pH. Now this can usually happen when you sleep and your mouth is closed and carbon dioxide keep accumulating. Plasma acidity. Infection. Infection. So infection will cause it. Fava bean, yeah. Because it produces a lot more free radical. That's the unique thing about them.
NSAIDs?
Huh?
NSAIDs?
No. No. Let me tell you this. Sulfa, methoxazole, and trimethoprim. This drug will cause it. Which part of it? This is the sulfa drugs. Sulfa drugs. Sulfa drugs. Now, these are all triggers for them. If you don't have these, then you're normal. No problem. But if you... Now, what if somebody has infection? Bacterial infection. That's one risk factor. And on top of that, you use sulfa drugs. That's two risk factors immediately. Usually the question tells you that. Oh, somebody had an infection, blah, 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 and you give them sulfamethoxazole and this, that, and then he developed a pale skin color, pale stool, dark urine, and jaundice. What do you think? And you have to figure out what part of the cycle they're asking about. Okay? And it's always boys. So, again, there are triggers for that. Unless your body is under stress, this will only cause symptoms when you have too much free radical production. Too much free radical, not normal free radicals. Look, if there's normal concentration of free radical, that means mitochondrial enzyme will neutralize them. No problem. But when you have so much free radicals that your body cannot accommodate them, of course, RBCs are at risk. Otherwise, they're not. So it's always episodic disease. Always episodic disease. Okay, so it depends. It's 100% guaranteed on the exam. Depends what they ask. They ask about the biochemistry of it, the anemia of it, you know, the drug, how you prevent it, and so forth. Okay, so look for those things. But at the end of the day, it's nothing more than hemolytic anemia in boys. Hemolytic anemia in boys. Episodic hemolytic anemia in boys. Triggered by what? Infection or medication use or fava beans. Now, fava beans is more common again in North Africa, so it's a major dish. Or yeah, is it appropriate to call it a dish, or is it just like... Okay, so that's for this. We are done with glucose metabolism. What time is it? 10:37. The last thing I want to do is lactose intolerance, which we can do in the GI. I'll leave it for GI. Okay. Huh? Yeah.